So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really glad that you're here. I love birds, and I have for a long time. Feeding birds in winter is an opportunity to bring the outdoors in. It's also an opportunity to strengthen our connection with the natural world, our connection with resident birds, and our connection with winter migrants. So some of the things I want to cover tonight are food and feeders, birds, and some of the ID, and also bird behavior, some interesting behavior to watch out, look for at your feeder that can just make it even more fun than saying, oh, there's a goldfinch, which is the bird that's featured in this photo. So I'll start with food. It's important to provide a mix of food. The more variety of food you have, the more variety of birds that you will attract. A couple of the major foods that are important to offer are black oil sunflower seed, white millet, cracked corn, or some kind of sort of high quality mixed seed, suet, and Niger. And there's some other seeds as well that I'll talk about. Black oil sunflower seed is the favorite of almost all of the birds that will visit your feeder. It's a really energy-rich food preferred by many birds. It has a thin shell. It's a smaller seed and a thinner shell than the typical striped black sunflower seed that a lot of people are familiar with, which means that it's easier to crack. It takes less energy for the birds to get to. And once they get inside and get the seed, that oily nut has a really high fat content. 28%. And that's really important for them to build up their fat reserves and keep those fat reserves going. This is a tufted titmouse that you see at a tube feeder that has black oil sunflower seed. Often, most of the birds will pick up one seed at a time. So the next group of seeds is white millet, cracked corn, or it could be a mixed seed. We may create our own, throw in some sunflower seeds as well, or buy a high quality mixed seed. This will often be at a mid-level or ground feeding birds or on the ground. Birds such as juncos and dark-eyed junco featured in the photo, mourning doves, sparrows, cardinals, blue jays, they'll be attracted to this kind of mixed seed. Fine cracked corn is an important addition to this to sprinkle on the ground or in a platform feeder. If you do purchase a bag of mixed seed, just beware of fillers. A lot of the less expensive seed can contain ingredients such as red millet, milo, wheat, hemp. These are typically seeds that the birds do not eat, and they're added as fillers. So just like if you're shopping at the grocery store, if you're shopping for bird seed, read the label and pay close attention to what's in your bird seed. Suet, which is fat, is a great addition to feeders. It's really high calorie, rich in calories, valuable to birds. And the main reason to add it is it attracts the woodpeckers. Other birds will use it, such as this red-breasted nuthatch in the photo, but it mainly can bring you in a variety of woodpeckers that would not visit if you did not add suet to your feeding station. And Niger is one of the last major groups of food. It's a seed of the African yellow daisy. It is actually not a thistle. It's often called thistle for thistle feeders, but the brand name is Niger. It has a very, very thin shell, easy to get at. It's 35% fat, 18% protein, so really energy rich, high quality food. It's often more expensive as a seed. So it's not necessary, but it can be a nice addition to your bird feeding station. And one of the reasons is that you might attract a little bit more variety of birds. Goldfinches, which are featured at the top, the American goldfinch, and siskins, which is the bird on the bottom. This small, really finely streaked brown bird is just a fun new bird to get at your feeder. It's a pine siskin. We're seeing more of them this winter than in a typical year. And you would provide Niger in a small tube feeder that has a smaller holes for the birds to get at the seed, and it's a smaller size. So you want to make sure if you provide Niger, you're using a tube feeder that's specifically designed to dispense Niger. You can also use a thistle sock, which is less expensive, and you will need to replace those every year or so. So this is looking at bird preference, and it's done by the wild bird feeding industry. And there are lots of charts out there for Audubon, and all different kinds of organizations have these charts, and they all say very similar information. So I'm going to get my pointer out. And if we look at black oil sunflower, you're going down the list of birds. Let's see if I can get right on target. That's a little wobbly. 3 is a high score. 3 is the best. Birds prefer it the most. 1 is a low score. Birds do not prefer it. So black oil hits many, many, many birds. Thinner than striped sunflower, high energy. It's just a great seed to provide. Let's go over to the white millet. I would avoid red millet, but white millet and cracked corn. So this can often attract birds that are not going to go to a tube feeder, not going to feed on the black oil. Birds such as mourning doves, birds such as junco. So you can expand your variety of birds by increasing the variety of birds you offer. Looking at Niger, often called thistle, the goldfinches are going to prefer it, house finches, but also purple finches, and especially the pine siskins, which is a great bird to get at your feeder. One other to point out is safflower seed right here. It's a favorite of the cardinals, and who doesn't love to have a cardinal visit your feeder in the winter? It's also, squirrels do not prefer it, so that's a good thing. If it's on a platform feeder or sprinkled on the ground, that may help attract cardinals to your feeder. Safflower seed can be bought separately and then added to a homemade mixture, or if you buy a high quality mixed seed, then it may often contain safflower seed in it. And for the mixed seed, we find the best bet is to disperse it in a ground platform or a platform feeder, or on the ground versus in a tube feeder. All right, let's look at feeder locations. I find just like for the seed, you want to have a mix of levels. You want to have variety. The suet we usually place up highest near the tree, as close to the tree. You can hang it from the tree or hang it from a cable near a tree. That's going to attract the woodpeckers, and a lot of other birds will visit that as well. The tube feeder, the one on the bottom right, is usually at window level. They can be filled with black oiled sunflower seed, or a special tube feeder filled with Niger, if you'd like to add that. And then the ground and platform feed on the lower left. These are going to be birds that prefer to feed on the ground, like the mourning doves that you'll see pictured in the photo. So here's a look at a bird feeding station. The tube feeders are sort of mid-level. The platform feeder you'll see on the left works well as on the ground, and to the left, just out of view, would be where the suet feeders would be closer to the tree. We will fill our feeders using this long pole because that enables us to keep the feeders well above the height of a black bear where they could get it, and also out of reach of squirrels. I just want to talk a little bit about timing for feeders. Mass Audubon and other organizations recommend that you begin feeding in mid-December and feed through the end of February. Those 2.5 months coincide with black bears' minimal activity, when the black bears are least active. They're often in a deep sleep during that period. What we want to avoid is attracting bears to our feeding locations. Bears have amazing memory, they have an amazing sense of smell, and we don't want to encourage wildlife to get used to humans and get used to more used to our human landscape. We want to keep wildlife wild. So if you do find that you have bears visiting your feeder, you want to bring them in at night, the feeders in at night, and then set them out in the day. If that does not work, then you want to stop feeding. All right, let's look at suet and who's visiting the suet. Mainly it's for woodpeckers. You're going to want to hopefully get woodpeckers. There's a variety that you may visit, including this beautiful red-bellied woodpecker that's featured in the photo. Other birds as well will visit suet, titmice, the nuthatches, chickadees, jays, Who doesn't like some really good high-fat food? The platform feeder, it's a fixed platform. So this can be mounted on a deck, mounted low, close to the ground. It can also be on a pole. You want to make sure that it's stable, doesn't wobble in the wind, and doesn't move when the bird lands on it. We'll add in this feeder, we'll add either a homemade mix of white millet, fine cracked corn, some sunflower seeds, maybe some safflower seeds, or a sort of high quality, already mixed bag of feed. Again, make sure you check out the labels. If you're going to buy a mixed bag, you want to avoid red millet, milo, wheat, and hemp. Often fillers added to seed. And the two feeders at the mid-level. The one on the left is for black oil sunflower, and the one on the right, the smaller feeder, is for Niger. And again, it's a specifically designed tube feeder for Niger, or also known as thistle or a finch feeder. So another addition to a birding station can be water, providing water. If temperatures are above freezing, it's not a huge issue. There's a lot of water they can find on the landscape. But if we have prolonged temperatures that are below freezing, then water can be much harder to find or take more energy for the birds to feed on the snow. So this is a 50 watt, which is a relatively low wattage heater, submerged in water on a deck. If you're looking at purchasing a water heater, a couple things to look for are you want to get as low wattage as possible. You really just want to keep the water above freezing. And so pay attention to the wattage on the box, or, as you're researching it. The other thing you want to make sure is the size of the element that's going in the container that's going to hold the water, because the element needs to be submerged all the time. So you want to measure it and make sure it's going to fit in whatever your container is. So let's look at some of the birds. It's really one of the really fun parts of bird feeding. The black-capped chickadee has a very distinctive alarm call, chickadee-dee-dee, communicates a lot within its own flock of birds. Chickadees will hang out in a group of approximately 6 to 10 for the winter. That's a pretty established group. Chickadees will also hang out in mixed flocks. So visiting your feeder, or if you're walking in the woods, a mixed flock may be, say, a half dozen group of chickadees, a couple of titmice, maybe a pair of white-breasted nuthatches, maybe a downy woodpecker. This allows them a lot more communication between each other in terms of finding food, and also between each other if there are predators around. More eyes basically can scout for food and scout for predators. So the black-capped chickadee has a pretty distinct hierarchy and pecking order, or feeding order, I'll call it. They're going to hang out in a group of about 6 to 10 chickadees. There'll be an alpha male and an alpha female. That alpha male will feed first, and the alpha female will feed second, and then in order will be the other younger birds that have joined this flock for the winter. The advantage for the alpha male and female is quite obvious. They get first choice of food while the other birds are keeping an eye out for predators. So if you're watching your feeder and a group of chickadees come, there'll be one chickadee that's going to feed first. The others will wait, and then there'll be that chickadee that's going to come next. And so you can sort of observe that behavior and watch that order. These are pretty amazing little birds, the black-capped chickadee. They have an unusual memory, a pretty amazing memory. They hide seeds. So one study showed them taking 70 seeds in one day from a feeder. Most of those they're caching, or sort of stashing and hiding somewhere nearby within 100 feet. So that's a pretty close distance. So they're hiding them, and they need to remember where they hid them. So that's important for their memory if they're hiding thousands and thousands of seeds during the course of the winter. So if you're outside, it's kind of fun to keep an eye out for where they go when they get the seed, and then where they're stashing it. So that's something you can look for in your backyard. Another reason they need a good memory is because of those social flocks that they hang out in. The dynamics of the social flocks, they're going to change each year. So they need a lot of memory for the fall and winter. So every fall, so the next fall, 2021, the neurons that are not necessary in the chickadees' brains will die. The neurons that retain that information from this year, so that they'll have new neurons, so that they're able to then have plenty of space to remember all the new hiding places that they're going to find, and also the social dynamics of the new flock that'll form for the next year. Sometimes I wish that would happen with our brain. Irrelevant information would just disappear and leave more space for new information that we need to acquire and we need to remember. The tufted titmouse is another bird that visits the black oil sunflower seeds. Your tube feeders. They're a little gray bird with big black eyes. Those black eyes are very distinctive. It also has a gray triangular crest, like a cardinal has a crest. Sometimes it's less obvious, like in this photo, than others. They, as well as the chickadees, have a dominant and subordinate dynamics, which means there'll be one in charge. There's a resident pair that feeds first and guards their territory. And then there are other younger titmice that will join them and will follow them around, learn from them, and help keep an eye out for predators as well. Titmice are one of the birds that the northern population has expanded. They believe it's a combination of warming temperatures from climate change and bird feeding. And in the past 40 years, their population has expanded northward considerably. White-breasted nuthatch, a great bird. You may see them together as a pair. This is a male. If you look at the head, it's got a black cap, a black crown on the top of the head and on the nape. If it was a female, it would be more gray. One study showed, watch white-breasted nuthatches, they were much more wary and less apt to visit a feeder if the titmice was removed from the flock. So we talked earlier about mixed flocks that hung out together in the winter, chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, maybe a downy woodpecker. Titmice are very vocal, and so that's really important in terms of letting the other birds in the flock know about perhaps where food is, and really importantly, where predators are. This is a great bird that's been seen a lot this fall and winter, the red-breasted nuthatch, a little bit smaller than the white-breasted nuthatch. Again, it's a male. You see that black head, black crown, black top of the head, and the red breast. Usually we do not see this bird at our feeders. Some people do, we haven't. But this year we have, and even more importantly, in the woods, they've just popped up everywhere. It's an eruptive year for winter finches and birds that, like the red-breasted nuthatch, that's not a finch. What that means is the cone seed crop, the berry crop like mountain ash, or the black birch seeds in Canada in the boreal forest was not a really strong year. So it was a poor to fair. So it was insufficient to supply a lot of these northern breeding birds with the food they need for the winter. So they fly south in pretty good numbers. It's been an amazing year for red-breasted nuthatches. You hear them in the woods all the time, and we get to see them at feeders, which is great. So I was curious as to sort of what I had observed when we were walking in the woods and how that played out in Franklin County. So I went on a site called eBird, which is a free site through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. eBird's goal is to gather information in the form of checklist of birds, archive it, and freely share it to power new data-driven approaches to science, conservation, and education. It's an amazing tool. So I sorted it for last fall, so September 2019 to December 2019, and then I sorted it by species, the red-breasted nuthatch, and then I chose an area that's approximately Franklin County. And you'll see all those markers, whether they're blue or red, there are sightings where people have seen red-breasted nuthatches. It doesn't say how many, but it just means they've been noticed. So this is for 2019. And let's look at the same map, same information for 2020. A lot more sightings you'll see all over the place. They're seen really common. Again, red-breasted nuthatches seen between September and December of this year. the majority of which, almost all, come down from the north, where there was not enough cone seeds. The American goldfinch, a great bird to see, very common at feeders. This dull green winter coat has replaced the sunshine yellow spring garb coat that you'll see at the bottom on the lower left. That dull green coat has a very dense layer of soft, fluffy feathers that provides a lot of extra insulation for this bird in the winter. The red finches, house finch and purple finch, they look alike. They're can be quite hard to tell apart. These are also birds that will be visiting the black oil sunflower, the tube feeder, perhaps the Niger feeder as well. So I'm going to do a quiz. Is this a house finch? If you think it is, thumbs up. Not sure? Maybe. Wiggle your fingers. Not a house finch? Thumbs down. No one's watching. It's a virtual audience. You're safe. All right. So if you think it's a house finch, thumbs up. Not sure? Thumbs down. All right. Thumbs up. It is a house finch. And I'll get into a little bit about how you can tell. All right. All right. House finches on the left, purple finches on the right. I think of the color, and that if I had picked up a purple finch in my hand and dunked it in sort of a reddish purple dye, that dye would cover most of the body. The red comes down most of the way on the breast and quite a bit down on the back as well, whereas the house finch, a little bit oranger, more orangey red of a color, and that red does not come down as far. It also, on the male on the upper left, has a brown streaked breast, not true for the male on the purple finch. I also find the females actually even easier to tell apart. If we look at the female house finch on the lower left, you're going to see a very brown bird, very streaked, but mostly brown, especially the head. The head's pretty much brown. And if you look at the female purple finch on the lower right, what you're going to see is a very sort of distinctive, almost bold pattern on the head. That white eye line above the eye, that brown cheek patch, much more sort of coloration and much more striking for the female. Other things to look for are the tail. The purple finch has a notched tail. The house finch is a little bit more square. Now let's look at suet birds. The woodpeckers are really what we're going for and what we want to attract. So two look-alike woodpeckers are the hairy and downy woodpeckers, and we're going to do the same thing. So let's talk about the bird on the left, that smaller woodpecker. Thumbs up if you think it's a hairy woodpecker. Not sure, no clue. Thumbs down if you think it's a downy woodpecker. All right, are you ready? Go for it. So the question was, is it a hairy woodpecker? And the answer would be not. It's a downy woodpecker on the left, the smaller woodpecker. They look almost identical. These are both females. If it was a male, it would have red patch on the head. One of the main things to look for if you don't see them right next together is the size of the beak. If we look at the downy woodpecker on the left, you'll see the bill is much more dainty and about half the length of the width of the head. If we look at the bill of the hairy woodpecker on the right, you're going to see a much stouter bill. And if you go from the base of the bill to the tip, it's about the width of the head of the hairy woodpecker. So a much different bill. If you're able to see them together or get a sense of the size, the downy woodpecker is about the size of the tufted mouse. And the hairy woodpecker, somewhere in between a cardinal and a robin. So it's quite a bit bigger. If you're looking for behavior, some things to look for are the hairy woodpeckers will often stay together in winter. So maybe a pair consistently comes to visit. Whereas the downy woodpeckers will be more solo and will hang out more with these mixed flocks. Also, the downy woodpecker is a smaller bird. You'll find it feeding more on smaller branches as they're hanging out on trees near perhaps your suet feeder, whereas the hairy woodpecker will be feeding more on the trunk. Here's a great woodpecker that may come to your suet feeder. Striking, sleeker in terms of silhouette. The red-bellied woodpecker, I know you're wondering where the red belly is, but that's its name. This is a male. If you look, you'll see the red is both on the back or the nape of the head and on the front or crown of the head. If it was a female, it would just be red on the back or the nape of the head. The red-headed woodpecker, it's not. It feels like it should be named that, but there is a red-headed woodpecker that lives farther south of us, has a almost totally red head, black body, and is a very different bird. These birds also have a different feeding behavior. They'll definitely visit the suet, but they'll more glean on the trunk of the tree versus sort of drilling holes to look for insects. This bird's range has expanded tremendously. When I first moved to Franklin County, 35 years or so, it was rare to see a red-bellied woodpecker. In the summer, it was even rarer to see one in the winter. And now they're just really common. They're at our feeders all the time. They're residents, they're breeding, and that's true throughout Massachusetts. So the graph you're looking at is data at the United States Geological Service from their headquarters, their research center in Maryland, and this is sorted specifically by Massachusetts. So this is Massachusetts data. You're looking at the vertical axis on the left, that's a relative abundance index, so it's not a specific number. And then years are on the right, and what you'll see is in the last 30 years, their numbers have just not. And again, warming climates is believed to be one of the main factors. Now we're looking on the ground. Platform feeders, birds that are going to feed on the ground, snowbirds. If the dark-eyed junco comes, that's the bird that's featured here, then cold weather is really close behind, just like you can tell that with a lot of residents of New England, they may head south. The most common feeder bird, over 80%, shows up at over 80% of feeders across North America. Very distinctive flock dynamics, a lot of hierarchy and status checking. So if you're looking at a feeding flock on the ground near your feeder, it'll be the male, the adult male with a dark gray head that will be feeding in the center of that food patch. And then farther out will be the young males. Farther out will be the adult females, a little bit browner in look and not this sort of dark gray head. And then even farther out will be the younger females. If you're farther out of the group, you're going to spend a lot more time looking for predators and a lot less time feeding. So there's clearly an advantage to being right in the middle. One behavior that's really fun to look for is this tail flicking. You'll see the white outer tail feathers of the junco. These are two male juncos. And that's an aggressive behavior. That's sort of saying, I'm dominant here. It's a way to establish dominance. And so it eliminates fighting. Flick your tail. It says, I'm the boss. I get to feed first and I get preference. Blue jays. Seed gobbler in the fall and range expander for a lot of trees. Really important for our ecology, our New England forests. So they gobble a lot of seeds, but they hide a lot of seeds. They pick up acorns, they pick up hickory nuts, they pick up beech nuts, and they stash them. Thousands of seeds for each bird. They don't stash them necessarily nearby where the tree is. They may fly up to 2.5 miles away, and they consistently will fly the length of a football field, so 100 yards. So they're going to really help disperse those seeds a distance. Over 150 vertebrate species feed on acorns. Acorns are a really important wildlife food in the fall, but the blue jay is the only one that really helps expand their range by moving those seeds a distance. And again, it's also going to help beech trees expand their range and hickory trees because they all like those really meaty nuts. It's also fun to look for the flock behavior. They have a dominance as well. So you may see a blue jay coming in, others waiting, and then the next blue jay will come in and take its turn, and so on. And that's just really fun to look for. The northern cardinal, who doesn't love them? That bright red of the male. The female, sort of a rusty brown with a little bit of red. They'll often visit in pairs. And the graph on the right is the same information as we just looked at with the red-bellied woodpecker. and you'll see again a tremendous increase in the past 30 years. In fact, the northern cardinal didn't breed in Massachusetts until 1958. So it's a relatively recent newcomer up this far north. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology, in an article reporting on notable trends from Feeder Watch, which is a citizen science database, attributed the increase in bird feeding during the past 30 years as a major factor in the expansion northward of the cardinal's range. So warming climates and the increase in available food in the winter has helped expand the range of this bird. American tree sparrow, they're a treat to get. You don't often see them. They're a northern breeder. They come down for the winter. And we only see them in our feeders in winter on really cold or stormy days. You know, that snowstorm when almost no other birds are around, we may get to see one. They have that little black dot on their breast. They're a really neat bird. And they also benefit from lazy gardening. We could call it messy gardening. Perhaps a better name would be wildlife gardening. So leaving leaves around, not cleaning up all your leaves, having a lot of weed seeds around, having a real variety of plants and vegetation in your yard, especially native plants, versus a real manicured yard can really benefit a lot of wildlife. And the American tree sparrow is one. If you're watching your feeder and all of a sudden the birds are quiet, they freeze, there may be an avian predator around. These accipiters, the sharp-shinned hawk and the Cooper's hawk, are two of the common ones that we have. They are resident, they're here year-round, whereas most of our birds of prey have migrated. South, or a lot of them have. On the left is the smaller sharp-shinned hawk. This is a male, it's gray on the back. The Cooper's hawk is on the right, it's larger, it has more of a rounded tail. The sharp-shinned hawk has more of a square tail. There's an overlap in size between the two. They're both really agile. Broad wings, long tail, really quick to maneuver in the forest. Cooper's hawk is approximately the size of a crow. Sharp-shinned hawk approximately the size of a blue jay, but there's an overlap. The females are larger and the males are smaller. So if you do see one and you're trying to tell the size, you can use sort of the blue jay crow reference framework, but also note if it's gray or brown, so if it's a male or female, because a large female sharp-shinned hawk can be the same size as a small male Cooper's hawk. They're great to have visit, perhaps not if you're a small bird, but they're kind of excitement that can come to your feeder. The sharp-shinned hawk feeds almost primarily on small birds, and the Cooper's hawk about half on mammals and half on birds, mostly morning times. Occasional visitors that we've had this year. It's been a really exciting year with a good eruptive year. Evening grosbeaks we've seen at our feeders in good numbers, and we haven't seen them in years. That's the bird on the upper right. Pine siskin on the lower right. Very finely streaked bird, a really fun bird to see. Again, they're showing up in higher numbers this year. And a redpoll, we've seen them around, but we have not had one at our feeder, but a lot of people have. It looks like a sparrow that's brown and white and has that red dot on its forehead. So those are all fun birds to see. And again, they're showing up this year in much, much bigger numbers because of the poor cone crop, birch crop, and berry crop up north. Citizen science can be a great tool. So this graph is based on data from Christmas bird counts from the last almost 50 years. This data is now being used for the Environmental Protection Agency, one of the indicators for climate change. If you look on the vertical axis, what you're seeing is the average distance that birds have moved north in miles. And then the years, this is about 50 years. So the average is a little bit over 40 miles that's looking at over 300 birds. So an average of all these birds, there's been a 40-mile movement north. One of the most extreme examples from data pulled from these Christmas bird counts is pine siskins. So in the past 40 years, they have moved north 288 miles. So their range has really expanded north from warming temperatures. what can we do? What can we do to help birds? We all love birds. We all love watching birds, or we wouldn't be here. We can keep cats inside. Each year, on average, they kill an estimated 1 billion birds and 20 billion mammals. Plant native plants, really important. Mow less frequently, less lawn. Minimize our carbon footprint, the amount of energy that we use, and purchase renewable electricity. Leave leaf litter alone, be a lazy gardener. And you can enjoy your extra free time by taking a walk or indulging in one of your favorite hobbies. It all adds up and it all makes a difference. And have fun watching your feeder, because you never know who's going to show up. Could be a barred owl, could be a cardinal. You just never know. But it's just really fun. Enjoy it and have fun looking at some of the different behaviors and trying to keep an eye out for sort of some of the interactions between the different birds and between birds of the same species. A couple of resources to check out. We will email you these resources as a follow-up, but just a couple of things to point out. Cornell Lab of Ornithology, their site all about birds, has an incredible resource on birds. You can listen to the sounds, you can learn more about the bird, you can help you with an ID. There's a free app you can download called Merlin. It's just an amazing resource. From Cornell is eBird, the site that I spoke about before. It's a database. Great Backyard Bird Count coming up. If you want to join, February 12th to 15th, you get an eBird account, which is free. Join Great Backyard Bird Count, which is free. And you can share your data during those 4 days by watching birds and their instructions on the website. Mass Audubon has a lot of good information about birds. Reading bird surveys, you can go back and look at past histories, learn about birds specific to Massachusetts. Audubon, which is the National Audubon Society, has a lot of good resources, and one that's in particular I want to call out is their native plant database, that you can enter your zip code and it'll give you a list of native plants specific for your area. Northfield Mountain Recreation Environmental Center, we have a new YouTube channel, and on it is Dr. Desiree Narango's talk that she gave in December as part of the Northfield Mountain program, co-sponsored with the Northfield Bird Club. It was an excellent program called A Chickadee's Guide to Gardening, focused on native plants and some of Desiree's research. And so you can visit that and click on the link and watch that program at your convenience. And the last one I just want to call out is the winter finch forecast, which comes out each fall and predicts the cone crop, birch seed crop, and berry crop in Canada's boreal forest, and can give a hint of sort of what birds we might, whether it's a good eruptive year, we'll get some of those northern migrants coming south or not.